billionaire walked away when a 5-year-old asked, "Where will we sleep now?" Days later, guilt pulled him back into a truth that shattered comfort, exposed silent harm, and forced a choice between power and conscience. One child's quiet courage would change how a city and one man learned to care. Pierce Halston stood at the edge of the cleared lot, as if it were a wound the city hadn't bothered to cover. Late November in Boston carried a sharp, patient cold, the kind that didn't rush, just stayed. Wind slid between concrete slabs and broken brick, lifting dust into the air, like memory trying to speak. This place had been approved, inspected, signed, legal, clean, finished. Pierce adjusted the cuff of his coat and raised his phone, framing the destruction from a careful angle. No faces, no past, just space, just progress. He'd learned how to do that, how to see land without seeing lives. That was when a small voice reached him. Not loud, not crying, steady. Mr. Pierce lowered his phone. A little girl sat on a scuffed pink suitcase near what had once been a front step. She was 5, maybe. Blonde hair, dusty eyes, blue and clear in a way that didn't accuse. A worn teddy bear rested in her arms, one ear slightly crooked. She looked up at him, studying the lines of his coat, the polish of his shoes. "Where do we sleep now?" The question landed gently. That was what made it heavy. Pierce didn't know what to say. There were procedures for displacement, vouchers, temporary housing lists. All of that existed somewhere else in files handled by people whose job it was to handle things. This was different. This was a child waiting where a house used to be. Not sure," Pierce said carefully. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." She nodded as if safety were a concept she'd already reviewed and found incomplete. "My mom said to wait," she replied. "She always comes back." Pierce checked his watch. Meetings, deadlines, applause waiting downtown. He turned away. Behind him, the girl remained on the suitcase, feet swinging slowly above the ground, waiting. The investor meeting unfolded exactly as Pierce expected. Glass walls, warm lighting, coffee served before anyone asked. Slides advanced with practiced confidence, market expansion, foot traffic, forecasts a projected 14% increase that drew approving nods around the table. "Urban renewal," Pierce said smoothly. "Optimized space, long-term value." Applause followed, not loud, satisfied. Yet as Pierce spoke, a different image pressed against the back of his mind. Not numbers, not margins, a pink suitcase, small hands gripping a teddy bear like it was a promise. He dismissed it. That was the skill. You learned it early in development. Don't personalize outcomes. Outcomes didn't have faces. Outcomes didn't ask questions. That evening, Pierce returned to his townhouse, quiet, immaculate, echoing in ways he had never noticed before. The housekeeper mentioned that Willa had already eaten. "She asked if you'd say goodnight," the woman added gently. Pierce hesitated, then nodded. Willa's room glowed warm against the cold night. She sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by toys arranged just so. When she saw him, she smiled wide and unguarded. "Daddy," she said. "You're late." "I know," Pierce replied, sitting beside her. "I'm here now." He tried to read. The words slipped. His thoughts wandered back to a cleared lot and a child who knew how to wait too well. "You look far away," Willa said, touching his sleeve. Pierce swallowed. "I met someone today. Was she nice?" He paused. "Yes, she was." Willa nodded, satisfied. Children accepted simple truths. As she drifted to sleep, Pierce stood in the doorway longer than usual. In the hall's reflection, he saw two versions of childhood, one wrapped in warmth and certainty, the other sitting alone among ruins. For the first time, his success felt incomplete. Pierce didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the question returned, not loud, not desperate, just steady. "Where do we sleep now?" By morning, exhaustion sharpened into something else. Resolve, maybe, or responsibility, he wasn't sure yet. He canceled 2 meetings without explanation. He put on a simpler coat and left without his driver. Walking changed the city. From the street level, Boston felt different, less polished, more human. Small shops opened early. A man swept his steps. A woman waited for a bus with a coffee she guarded like warmth itself. Pierce reached the neighborhood again and slowed. Near a community center entrance, he saw the pink suitcase. The little girl sat beside it, feet dangling, teddy bear tucked under one arm. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking anyone for anything. She was simply there, watching people come and go. Pierce stopped a few steps away, careful not to startle her. She looked up and recognized him immediately. "You came back," she said. "Yes," Pierce replied. "I did." "My name is Junie," she added, as if correcting an oversight. "Junie Quinn." "That's a good name," he said. She considered this. "My mom says names are important." Pierce nodded. "She's right." He sat on the low step nearby, leaving space between them. No touching, no urgency. "What are you doing here today?" he asked. Junie hugged the bear a little tighter. "Waiting." "For your mom? Yes. She's finding us a place." There it was again, that quiet courage that didn't know it was brave. Pierce exhaled slowly. This time he didn't look at his watch. Pierce didn't move closer. He stayed where he was, seated on the low concrete step, hands resting loosely on his knees. Junie watched him with the kind of focus adults rarely noticed, quiet, alert, measuring. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small paper bag. "I brought food," he said, then paused. "I won't hand it to you." Junie's head tilted slightly. Instead of offering it, Pierce placed the bag on the ground beside the step, close enough to be seen, far enough to be chosen. "My mom has rules," Junie said. Her voice was calm, not defensive. "Strangers can be kind, but we still do rules." "That's a good rule," Pierce replied immediately. "You should keep it." Junie studied him again, as if checking whether his words matched his posture. Then she slid off the suitcase, picked up the bag, and opened it. Inside was a sandwich cut cleanly into triangles. She smiled just a little. "Triangles taste better," she said. Pierce smiled, too surprised it came so easily. Junie took a bite, chewed slowly, then stopped. She folded the remaining half carefully and slipped it into the pocket of her thin jacket. "For my mom," she explained. Pierce felt something tighten behind his ribs. "What's your bear's name?" he asked, nodding toward the worn toy. "Buttons," Junie replied. "He listens really well." Buttons' one crooked ear leaned against her cheek as she sat again on the suitcase. The wind moved through the open lot, carrying dust and distant traffic noise. Pierce realized something quietly unsettling. Junie wasn't acting like a child waiting to be rescued. She was acting like a child managing a situation. And that made him want to be careful, very careful, not to turn kindness into something that took her control away. "Junie." The voice came sharp, protective, and fast. A young woman hurried toward them from the community center doors, eyes already locked on her daughter. She crossed the space in seconds and pulled Junie close, one arm firm around her shoulders. Junie leaned into her without fear. "I'm okay, Mom," she said. He waited near me. The woman's gaze snapped to Pierce, measured, alert, unafraid. "Who are you?" she asked. Pierce stood, keeping his hands visible. "Pierce. I saw Junie earlier this week near the construction site. I was worried." The woman didn't soften. She adjusted Junie's jacket, checking the pocket instinctively. "You shouldn't talk to strangers," she said to Junie, not unkindly. "I didn't," Junie replied. "He talked near me." That earned Pierce a brief, reluctant pause. "I'm Mara Quinn," the woman said finally, her mother. Pierce nodded. "I left food on the ground." She chose. Mara's eyes flicked to the sandwich wrapper, then back to Pierce. "People don't help for free," she said flatly. "I'm not asking for anything," Pierce answered. And I won't offer what you don't choose. Silence settled thick, testing. Junie tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. Mom, he has a daughter. Mara looked down. You talked about that, she asked, Pierce said. She's 6. Her name is Willa. Junie's eyes lit. He has a horse, a toy one. Mara exhaled slowly, not convinced but not alarmed either. We're leaving, she said. Junie nodded, obedient. As they turned away, she glanced back once. Bye, Mr. Pierce, she said. Thanks for not rushing. The words stayed with him long after they disappeared inside. That night, Pierce couldn't stop thinking about the way Junie said not rushing, as if time itself were something adults usually mishandled. At home, Willa sat at the kitchen counter, coloring legs, swinging. The house was warm, quiet, safe in a way Pierce had always taken for granted. You're home early, Willa said. Yes, Pierce replied. I wanted to be. She looked up, studying his face the way Junie had. Children noticed changes long before adults named them. Did something happen? Willa asked. Pierce chose his words carefully. I met a little girl who's having a confusing week. Is she sad? He thought of Junie, steady waiting. Not exactly. She's patient. Willa frowned. Being patient is hard. Pierce smiled softly. It is. Later, after Willa fell asleep with her stuffed horse tucked under her arm, Pierce stood by the window, city lights blinking below. Somewhere out there, another child was also lying down, or maybe still waiting. 2 girls. Same city. Same age. Different worlds. For the first time, Pierce understood that wealth didn't just build comfort. It built distance. And distance once seen clearly became impossible to ignore. He reached for his phone, then stopped. This wasn't something to delegate. This was something to approach slowly, lawfully, respectfully, humanly. Tomorrow he decided he would return, not as a fixer, but as someone willing to stay present long enough to listen. The weather shifted by late afternoon. Boston's sky dimmed, early clouds pressing low like a held breath. Pierce watched from across the street as Mara and Junie waited beneath the narrow awning of a closed bookstore. Not hiding, not stranded, just paused, caught between plans. Junie stood close to her mother, buttons tucked beneath her arm. She wasn't complaining. She never did. That was what unsettled Pierce most. He approached slowly, stopping several steps away. Hi, he said, keeping his voice light. I won't interrupt. I just wanted to check in. Mara's posture stayed firm, but she didn't move Junie behind her this time. We're waiting for a ride, Mara said. It's running late. Junie coughed softly, not dramatic, just enough to be noticed. Mara's hand rubbed her daughter's back automatically. Pierce didn't panic. He didn't dramatize. There's a clinic 2 blocks away, he said. Or I can call a car. Your choice. I'll step back. He did, turning slightly, creating space. Mara weighed the options. Junie looked up at her, trusting, not asking. We'll walk, Mara decided. Thank you, Pierce nodded. I'll walk near you, not with you. That earned him a glance, quick, assessing, almost respectful. They moved down the street together, but apart, 3 separate shadows under the same gray sky. Cars passed, city sounds wrapped around them, normal, ordinary. At the clinic, the staff was calm and efficient. No sirens, no urgency, just warmth, professionalism, routine care. Junie sat on the chair, swinging her legs while Buttons rested beside her. Mara handled the forms. Her jaw tightened once, then steadied. Pierce stepped forward quietly. I can cover today's visit, he said. Legally. No paperwork for you. Mara hesitated, pride flickering. Then she nodded once. Today, she said. For her. Junie looked between them. Mom, it's okay, Mara replied. We're choosing. Pierce felt the weight of that word settle on him. Choosing. Dusk settled by the time they left the clinic, the cold sharper now. The clinician's advice was simple warmth, rest steady routines. Pierce offered one option and set limits himself. There's an apartment my company keeps for visiting staff, he said. It's empty tonight. Clean, dry, one night only. No conditions. Mara studied him carefully. You won't stay? I won't, Pierce replied. I'll leave the keys at the desk. You decide. Junie looked up. Is there a window? Yes, Pierce said. 2. That seemed to matter. The apartment was modest, neutral furniture, a kitchen that looked unused but honest. Pierce stood by the doorcoat, still on distance intact. I'll go, he said. There's a number on the counter for building security, and a list of local resources. Use what helps. Ignore what doesn't. Mara nodded, her voice quieter now. Thank you. Junie set buttons on the bed and explored the room with careful curiosity. Pierce paused at the doorway. Junie, you did really well today. Junie considered this. I waited, she said. Yes, Pierce replied. You did. Outside, the city hummed. Pierce walked away, resisting the urge to look back. This wasn't rescue. It was shelter with dignity intact. Later that night at home, Pierce found Willa asleep with her stuffed horse tucked under her chin. He sat at the edge of the bed longer than usual. 2 girls, same night, different ceilings. Pierce understood something. Then helping wasn't about grand gestures. It was about knowing when to stay and when to leave. Morning arrived quietly. Sunlight slipped through thin curtains in the apartment. Junie woke first, sitting up slowly, buttons pressed to her chest. For a moment she listened, no shouting, no rushing, no echo of yesterday's uncertainty. Mama, she whispered. Mara stirred immediately. I'm here. Junie smiled and relaxed back into the pillow. At home across the city, Willa watched Pierce pour coffee without checking his phone. You're different, she said. Pierce looked up. Different how you're listening with your whole face, Willa replied, entirely serious. He laughed softly. I'll take that as a compliment. Later that afternoon, Pierce returned to the neighborhood, but not to the apartment. He waited outside the community center, hands in his pockets. Patient, Mara came out with Junie. Junie spotted him first. Mr. Pierce. She stopped herself, remembering. Mom. Mara nodded. You can say hello. Pierce knelt, not close, not looming. Hi, Junie grinned. Buttons slept good. He likes quiet. I'm glad, Pierce said. Mara crossed her arms, not defensive, just cautious. We're moving to a boarding house nearby, she said. Short term. That sounds sensible, Pierce replied. If you need a reference for childcare or work hours, nothing personal, just logistics. Mara studied him. You're careful. I'm trying to be, Pierce said honestly. Junie tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom? He said his daughter has a horse. Mara sighed softly. Yes, Pierce added quickly. No meetings, no pressure, just information. Mara met his eyes. We'll see. As they walked away, Junie turned back one last time and waved. Pierce stayed where he was, letting distance remain. Somewhere between the waiting and the choosing, something fragile had begun to form. Not trust yet, but possibility. That evening, Pierce cooked dinner himself. It wasn't impressive, pasta, jarred sauce, bread warmed too long, but it was intentional. Willa noticed immediately. She always did. You didn't order, she said, climbing onto the stool at the counter. I wanted to try, Pierce replied. She watched him stir, head tilted. Did the girl like the food you brought? Pierce paused. He hadn't told her details. Children didn't need them. But Willa's eyes weren't asking for a story. They were asking for truth. She did, he said. She chose it. Willa nodded as if that mattered a great deal. That's good. They ate quietly. The city hummed beyond the windows, distant and alive. When Willa finished, she pushed her plate aside. Dad, she said carefully, are we rich? Pierce smiled faintly. Yes. Like, rich, yes. Willa considered this. Then why don't we know everyone? The question struck harder than any accusation. We can't, Pierce said, but we can notice. Willa swung her legs. I noticed you came home earlier. Pierce reached across the counter and squeezed her hand. I'm trying to do that more. Later, as he tucked her in, Willa pulled her stuffed horse Sky close. If the girl wants to meet Sky, she said she can. Just for a little. Pierce knelt beside the bed. Only if her mom says yes, and only if it's safe. Willa nodded solemnly. Rules are good. After the light went off, Pierce stood in the doorway longer than usual. He understood something. Then Willa wasn't just watching him change. She was calibrating her world by his choices. Downstairs, Pierce opened his laptop and began reading policy documents he'd ignored for years. Relocation timelines, impact assessments, legal fine print. Everything was compliant. Everything was distant. He closed the screen. Compliance wasn't the same as care. And somewhere between those two words, he knew the next fracture waited. Mara met Pierce in the common room of the boarding house, a narrow space with old couches and a window that rattled when the wind picked up. Junie sat at the table coloring buttons propped beside her like a supervisor. You wanted to talk? Mara said, arms crossed, not hostile, just firm. Yes, Pierce replied. About a short meeting, for the kids. Mara didn't look at him right away. I won't let this turn into a story, she said. No fairy tales, no rescues. I don't want that either, Pierce answered. 1 hour, public space. You there the whole time. No photos, no gifts unless you approve. Mara studied him, searching for cracks. You're careful, she said. I have to be, Pierce replied. Power makes people careless if they don't watch themselves. Junie looked up. Mom Mara softened immediately. What is it, honey? Can I meet the horse? Junie asked. Just to say hi. Mara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. 1 hour, she said again. And we leave when I say. Pierce nodded. That's fair. The meeting happened 2 days later at the community center playroom. Willa arrived holding Sky carefully, as if the toy understood the gravity of the moment. The girls stared at each other, same height, same age, same cautious curiosity. This is Sky, Willa said. Junie held Buttons closer. This is Buttons. He listens. They smiled. Within minutes, the room filled with quiet laughter. Nothing loud, nothing reckless. Just children sharing space. Mara watched every movement. Pierce stayed back, hands in pockets, letting the moment belong to them. For the first time in weeks, Junie laughed freely. Mara felt relief and fear. Relief because her daughter was still light. Fear because light things broke easily. As the hour ended, Mara called Junie gently. Junie hugged Sky once, then handed her back. Thank you for letting me borrow, she said. Willa beamed. As they left, Mara paused beside Pierce. This doesn't change anything, she said. I know, Pierce replied. But as he watched Junie walk away smiling, he realized something had already changed inside him. Pierce's office felt colder than usual. Caleb Rourke stood across the desk, jacket still on expression unreadable. He didn't sit. We ran a routine compliance review, Caleb began. Demolition block, tenant transitions, displaced residents. Pierce nodded, already uneasy. Caleb slid a thin folder forward. Junie Quinn is listed as a displaced minor tied to that site. The room seemed to narrow. Confirmed, Pierce asked. Yes. Pierce opened the folder with careful hands. Addresses, dates, photos he didn't linger on. Caleb continued. Your personal expenses were flagged. Clinic visit, transportation, visits logged by building security. Illegal, Pierce asked. No, Caleb said. But risky. Pierce leaned back. Because of optics. Because of power, Caleb corrected. If her mother discovers you own Halston Meridian, I didn't know at first, Pierce said quietly. But you know now, Caleb replied. And silence becomes a choice. Pierce stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, busy and different. What happens if I tell her Pierce asked? She'll feel betrayed, Caleb said. And she'll be right to. And if I don't, Caleb's voice dropped, then you're building trust on an omission. That's worse. Pierce closed his eyes. Caleb straightened. I'm not here to stop you from doing the right thing. I'm here to tell you the cost. When Caleb left, Pierce remained by the window, the folder open on his desk. Outside, Boston moved on. Inside, Pierce understood something terrifying and unavoidable. The truth wasn't coming. It was already overdue. The afternoon light in the boarding house was thin and pale, slipping through the window, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Pierce sat across from Mara at the small table. Junie was in the next room, drawing quietly, buttons propped beside her. The sound of colored pencils moving across paper felt louder than it should have. Mara wrapped her hands around a mug that had long since gone cold. There's something you don't know, she said. Pierce felt the air shift. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He had learned that some truths needed space before they could breathe. Junie's father's name was Evan Quinn. He was an engineer, Mara began, not the kind who just signed off on blueprints. He cared. About load limits. About safety margins. About people he would never meet. She smiled faintly, briefly. He used to tell Junie bedtime stories about buildings that protected the families inside them, like they were alive. Pierce swallowed. Evan got hired by a development firm right out of school, Mara continued. We bought our first house. It wasn't big, but it was ours. Junie learned to walk in that living room. Her voice steadied as if she had told this story many times to herself, if no one else. One day, Evan found a structural issue on a project. A flaw that wasn't dramatic, not obvious, but dangerous over time. Pierce's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. He reported it, documented it, asked them to stop and fix it. Mara's jaw clenched. They told him he was overreacting, that he was slowing things down. She looked up, then eyes sharp. They fired him. Pierce felt something cold slide down his spine. The industry is small, Mara said. Word travels fast. Evan couldn't get hired again as an engineer. He drove rideshare, took night jobs, slept less so Junie could eat better. Junie's laughter drifted faintly from the other room. It felt like a knife wrapped in silk. One night, Mara said quietly he fell asleep at the wheel. She didn't describe it. She didn't need to. Pierce bowed his head. I was left with the mortgage, Mara continued. Medical bills. Debt. I sold what I could. I worked 2 jobs, then 3. I tried to keep the ground under us from disappearing. She took a breath. 6 months later, that project Evan warned about partially failed. People were hurt. Settlements were paid quietly. Pierce knew that project. He knew the report. And worse, he knew the company. Mara looked at him, searching his face. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said. Maybe because you're the first person who's looked at Junie like she matters more than the situation she's in. Pierce's chest felt too tight to hold breath. In the next room, Junie called softly. Mom. Mara wiped her eyes instantly. I'm here, sweetheart. Pierce stared at the table, knowing with a terrible certainty that the truth he was hiding had just become unbearable. That evening, the 4 of them sat together in Junie's small room. Blankets were draped between chairs, forming a lopsided fort. A flashlight lay in the center like a campfire. Willa and Junie whispered plans for imaginary expeditions while Buttons and Sky guarded the entrance. For a moment, the world felt gentle. Pierce stood near the doorway, heart pounding. Mara poured coffee in the kitchenette, back turned. This was the last moment of peace he would ever have with her. Pierce, she said suddenly, not looking at him. You've been quiet. He knew then. This was the moment Caleb had warned him about. Not later. Not after trust deepened further. Now, Mara Pierce said hoarsely. There's something I need to tell you. She turned, cautious. In the room, the girls laughed. Willa's voice rose bright and carefree. Pierce's hands trembled. "The company that demolished your house," he began. "The one tied to that project," Evan reported. Mara's eyes narrowed. "What about it?" Pierce swallowed. There was no way to soften this. "It's mine," he said. "Halston Meridian. I'm the owner." Silence fell like a dropped plate. Mara stared at him as if he had spoken in another language. "No," she whispered. "That's not funny." "I didn't know at first," Pierce said quickly. "I swear I didn't. But when I found out you knew," Mara interrupted, voice shaking. "At some point you knew." Pierce nodded. "Yes." Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. "So you didn't just meet us?" She said every word precise. "You created us." In the room behind them, the girls fell quiet. "You walked into my daughter's life," Mara continued, tears finally breaking free, "knowing you were responsible for what happened to us. And you let her trust you." "I cared," Pierce said desperately. "I still do." "That makes it worse," Mara snapped. "Because you let us believe it was clean." Junie stepped out of the fort, buttons clutched tight. "Mom, why are you crying?" Mara's expression changed instantly. She knelt, pulling Junie close. "It's okay," she said gently. "Grown-up things." Willa looked up at Pierce, eyes wide. "Daddy, what did you do?" Pierce felt something in him fracture. Mara stood protective and unyielding. "We're leaving. Now." Pierce stepped aside immediately. No arguments. No excuses. At the door, he turned back once. "I'm sorry," he said. Mara met his eyes, raw, furious, wounded. "Don't come back," she said. And this time Pierce knew she meant it. The mansion had never felt so empty. Pierce stood in the hallway outside Willa's room, listening to her cry quietly into her pillow. He hadn't heard that sound before, not like this. Not the easy tears of a scraped knee. These were confused tears. "Why won't Junie come back?" Willa asked through hiccups. Pierce sat beside her, voice unsteady but honest. "Because I waited too long to tell the truth," he said. "That wasn't nice," Willa replied simply. No, Pierce agreed. It wasn't. Days passed. Willa grew quieter. Her drawings changed, two stick figures separated by a thick line. Junie's name appeared once, then disappeared. Pierce returned to his office, but the work felt hollow. Every report carried a shadow. Every signature felt heavier. Caleb watched him carefully. "You did the right thing," he said finally. Pierce shook his head. "I did the late thing." At night, Pierce replayed the moment in Junie's room, the laughter before the truth, the silence after. He understood something now with painful clarity. Silence had protected him. Truth had protected them, and he had chosen silence until it was almost too late. On the fourth night, Willa stood in the kitchen pushing her food around. "Daddy," she said softly. "Junie didn't do anything wrong." Pierce closed his eyes. "I know." "Then fix it," Willa continued. "Not with sorry words, with real things." The words landed clean and final. That night, Pierce made calls not to investors but to policy teams. He ordered reviews, changes, safeguards, funds rerouted, timelines extended, human impact reviews mandated. No announcements, no press, just work. And when it was done, Pierce sat alone in the dark, understanding the final truth of it all. Redemption didn't begin with forgiveness. It began with responsibility, taken fully, quietly, and without expecting to be welcomed back. The first thing Pierce did was stop trying to feel better. He didn't buy himself a clean conscience with a donation. He didn't post a statement. He didn't call a reporter to clarify intentions. He didn't ask anyone to understand him. He sat alone in his office after hours, the city's lights smeared across the glass like blurred judgment, and he opened the folder Caleb had left behind. Names, addresses, timelines, lives that had been reduced to rows. Pierce had spent years telling himself the paperwork was the hard part. That legality equaled morality, that if things were within policy, they were by default acceptable. Now he understood policies could be clean and still be cruel. He called Caleb at 9:18 p.m. "I want a full audit," Pierce said. "Not the kind that checks boxes, the kind that asks what we did to people." Caleb paused. "You're asking for trouble." "I'm asking for truth," Pierce replied. "And I want changes that stick even when I'm not in the room." The next morning, Pierce walked into a board meeting without the usual calm. He was calm, yes, but it was the calm of someone who had decided to stop negotiating with himself. He spoke plainly. "Starting today, we're updating our displacement protocols. Longer notice periods, verified relocation options before demolition begins, on-site human services partnerships, a dedicated relocation team that reports outside project leadership." One board member blinked. "That will slow timelines." Pierce held the gaze. "Good." Another frowned. "Costs will rise." Pierce nodded once. "Yes." Silence, sharp and brittle. Pierce continued. "And every project will require a human impact review, not a brochure. A report with names, family needs, and verified alternatives. If we can't meet the standard, we don't move forward." A hand lifted. "Pierce, this is philanthropy disguised as governance." Pierce shook his head. "No. It's governance finally acting like it remembers people live in buildings." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a fist. That would have been performance. He had done enough performance for a lifetime. After the meeting, Pierce went home early. Willa sat at the table coloring. She looked up cautious, like her joy had learned to hesitate. "Did you fix it?" she asked. Pierce sat across from her. "I started fixing it." Willa stared at her paper. "Junie's not coming back." Pierce swallowed. "Maybe not. And that's something I have to accept." Willa's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded as if she was practicing being brave. Pierce reached into his pocket and pulled out Sky's small brush, the one Willa used to groom her stuffed horse because Willa believed care required rituals. "I brought this," he said quietly, placing it on the table. "Not as a gift. Just because I think you'll want it." Willa touched it, then pulled her hand back. "I don't want Junie to think I'm sad because she left." Pierce softened. "Then don't make it about loss. Make it about respect." Willa looked up. How Pierce considered. "By doing what you did in the playroom, sharing without demanding anything back." That evening, Pierce drafted something different from policy. Not a check, a structure. He created a trust fund administered by a third-party nonprofit partner, education support for displaced children affected by Halston Meridian projects. The fund had strict rules: no publicity, no naming rights, no donor recognition. It would exist even if Pierce disappeared. One scholarship, however, was specific. For Junie Quinn. Pierce wanted to attach his name to it in the private way a guilty man might, but he didn't. He forced himself to do the harder thing, let it be about her, not him. He wrote one letter, short, plain, and honest. No begging, no "I'm a good man." Just this: "I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm asking you to consider her future. If you refuse, nothing changes. If you accept, nothing changes, except her options." Pierce signed it with a simple, steady hand. For the first time, his signature didn't feel like ownership. It felt like accountability. Mara's new job was not glamorous, but it was stable. A front desk position at a downtown clinic. Real hours, predictable shifts. A paycheck that didn't require her to hold her breath between bills. She didn't tell Junie everything. She didn't have to. Children didn't need the full weight of adult reality. They only needed honesty in the pieces they could carry. Junie loved the routine. Breakfast at the same time, shoes by the door, buttons tucked into the backpack pocket like a secret. But sometimes when Mara thought Junie wasn't looking, Junie would glance at Sky's absence like a missing note in a song. Willa's name wasn't said much, not because Junie forgot, because remembering felt like touching a bruise. On a Thursday afternoon, Mara stepped out after her shift and found Pierce Halston standing across the street. Not at the door, not blocking her path, not close. He looked smaller somehow, no suit, no entourage, no confident glide, just a man holding an envelope like it weighed more than paper. Mara's chest tightened. Pierce waited until she moved first. When she did, he crossed slowly, keeping distance. "I won't keep you," he said. "I just need to offer this." Mara's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Pierce didn't step closer. He held the envelope out at arm's length, then set it on the bench between them again, the same rule he'd followed with the sandwich. "Choose. Don't take. It's an education trust," he said. "Administered by a nonprofit. Legally separate. No conditions, no publicity, no naming." Mara's jaw tightened. "I don't let people buy my child." Pierce nodded once. "I understand." He didn't argue. That was what made her heart ache with anger. If he had pushed, she could have rejected him easily. But he stood there letting her have control. "It's not from me," Pierce added. "Not in the way you think. It's structured so Junie can use it whether I exist or not." Mara stared at the envelope like it might explode. "You think this fixes what you did?" she said, voice low. "No," Pierce replied. "I think it prevents me from doing it again to someone else. And it gives her options she didn't ask to need." Mara wanted to throw it back at him, to tell him he didn't get to write himself into their story as the final chapter. But then Junie's voice appeared in her mind, small and clear. "If I learn a lot, can I help kids feel safe too?" Mara's throat tightened. "You can't be in our lives," she said. "Not like before." Pierce's eyes didn't flinch. "I won't ask to be." Willa, Mara began, then stopped. Saying Willa's name felt like stepping onto unstable ground. Pierce's voice softened. "Willa misses her, but she doesn't blame her. She blames me." Mara's anger flashed. "Good." Pierce didn't deny it. "Good." Mara reached for the envelope, then pulled her hand back again. Pride stood between her and the bench like a guard. Pierce waited. Finally, Mara spoke, bitter and honest. "I hate needing help." Pierce's voice dropped. "You didn't fail her. You kept her safe." "That's not failure," Mara swallowed hard. "If I take this, it doesn't mean I forgive you." "I know," Pierce said. "It shouldn't." A long pause passed. Cars moved. People walked by. Ordinary life continued. Mara picked up the envelope. Not with relief, with resolve. "I'm taking it because Junie deserves choices," she said. "Not because you deserve comfort." Pierce nodded once. "That's the only reason it should exist." Mara turned to leave. Then she stopped. "Don't follow us," she said. "Don't show up at her school. Don't try to check in." Pierce's voice was steady. "Understood." Mara walked away holding the envelope like a contract with the future. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness. Not softness. A narrow, stubborn corridor of possibility, built from boundaries that Pierce had finally learned to respect. Junie found the envelope by accident. It sat on the kitchen counter under a stack of mail, but Junie was 5, and 5-year-olds were detectives by nature. She didn't open it. She didn't sneak. She simply asked the question in the direct way children asked questions that adults spent years avoiding. "Mom," she said, pointing. "What's that?" Mara crouched to Junie's height. "It's a paper about school." Junie's eyes widened. "Like big school, like good school," Mara replied gently. "If you want." Junie hugged buttons. "Do I have to be perfect?" Mara's heart cracked. She kept her voice calm. "No. You have to be you." Junie frowned. "Is it from Mr. Pierce?" Mara didn't lie. "Yes." Junie was quiet for a moment, chewing on the thought like a careful bite. "Is he mad?" Junie asked. Mara shook her head. No. He's learning. Junie considered that. I'm learning too. Mara smiled, despite herself. I know. Across the city, Willa sat on Pierce's couch with Sky in her lap, holding a crayon but not drawing. Junie hates us, Willa said suddenly. Pierce's chest tightened. Junie doesn't hate you. How do you know? Pierce exhaled. Because Junie's heart is not small, and because what happened wasn't your fault. Willa stared at Sky's stitched eyes. But you made her cry, Pierce nodded. Yes. Willa's voice dropped. Are you still a good dad? Pierce's throat burned. He leaned forward. I'm trying to be a better one. Willa studied him like a tiny judge, serious fair. Then she slid off the couch and walked to her room. She returned with a piece of paper folded in half. I drew something for Junie, she said. But you can't give it. That's not fair. Pierce took the paper gently. Then we won't give it. Willa frowned. Then why did I draw it? Pierce unfolded it carefully. 2 little houses, side by side, a path between them. No fence, no gates. Willa pointed. This is her house, this is ours, and this is the path. But the path has rules. Pierce swallowed hard. That's very wise. Willa shrugged like it was obvious. Rules keep people safe. That night, Mara received a call from the school district office. The scholarship trust had been verified. Paperwork was clean. Options opened real ones. Not favors, not loopholes. Legitimate support. Mara thanked the administrator and hung up. She stood in her kitchen holding the phone like it had changed weight. Junie tugged on her sleeve. Mom Mara knelt. Yes, baby. Junie looked up, earnest. If I go to a new school, can I make friends that don't leave Mara's eyes filled? She blinked it away quickly. Friends don't always stay close, but good friends stay real. Junie hugged Buttons. I liked Willa. Mara's throat tightened. I know, Junie whispered almost shyly. Can I write her a note? Mara paused. Every protective instinct rose, fear of reopening wounds, fear of blurred boundaries. Then she remembered protection wasn't the same as isolation. Safety could include bridges if the bridge was built with rules. One note, Mara said carefully. And we keep it simple. Junie smiled like sunrise. Okay. She sat at the table and drew 2 small hearts, one labeled Junie, one labeled Willa. Between them she drew a path. At the bottom she wrote in crooked letters, Hi Willa. I hope you are okay. Mara stared at the note, then looked out the window at the city. Somewhere Pierce was learning what it meant to do the right thing without being invited back inside. Somewhere Willa was learning that sharing didn't guarantee return, but it still mattered. And here at this small table, Junie was doing what she'd always done best. She wasn't asking to be rescued. She was asking for a safe way to hope. The school courtyard buzzed with a gentle chaos, backpacks bumping legs, parents lingering longer than necessary. The soft panic of new beginnings dressed up as excitement. Junie stood very straight in her navy blue uniform. It was a little stiff, clearly new. Buttons peeked from her backpack pocket, one ear still slightly crooked, as if he too was bracing for something important. Mara knelt to adjust Junie's collar. Remember, she said softly, you don't have to be brave all day, just brave enough for the next step. Junie nodded. I can do steps. Across the courtyard, Pierce stood with Willa, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He had promised himself he wouldn't interfere. He was here only because Willa needed him, and even then, only at the edge. Daddy, Willa whispered suddenly. Look. Pierce followed her gaze. Junie Quinn stood not 10 yards away, eyes wide, scanning the unfamiliar world. For a heartbeat, she looked small again. Willa didn't wait. She slipped free of Pierce's hand and ran. Junie turned just in time before Willa collided into her with a hug so fierce it knocked the breath from both of them. They laughed, surprised, relieved, real. You came, Willa said. I go here now. Junie replied, smiling so wide it hurt to look at. Parents stared, curious but kind. Teachers called for lines to form. Pierce stayed where he was. Across the space, Mara met his eyes. Her face was calm, unreadable. Then just once she nodded. Not forgiveness, permission. The bell rang. The girls were gently pulled apart, hands slipping only when they had to. I'll save you a seat, Willa called. Junie waved back. Okay, Pierce exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath since sunrise. Time did what time always did. It moved forward quietly without asking for approval. Pierce didn't become part of Junie's daily life. He didn't attend meetings or appear at doors. He kept his promise, which turned out to be harder than breaking it. Instead, he worked. Policies changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but deliberately. Families were given time, options, real alternatives. Buildings went up slower, better. Pierce stopped seeing that as a loss. Willa changed too. She came home talking less about what she had and more about what she noticed. Who sat alone at lunch? Who forgot their jacket? Who shared without being asked? She's funny, Willa said one night, referring to Junie. She explains things like they matter. At the boarding house, soon replaced by a small, steady apartment, Mara rebuilt her life piece by piece. Not rescued, not saved, supported. Junie flourished in ways that had nothing to do with charity. She asked questions. She drew pictures of houses with thick walls and bright windows. Sometimes she added labels. Safe, strong, for people. Once walking home from work, Mara saw Pierce across the street again. He noticed her first and stopped. He didn't cross. He didn't wave. She walked past him. As she did, Mara slowed just enough to speak without turning her head. She's doing well, she said. Pierce nodded, his voice steady. I'm glad, that was all. No gratitude exchanged. No debts implied. Just truth traveling the short distance it needed to. Spring arrived gently. In a small park near the school, Junie and Willa ran through sunlight with the fierce seriousness of children deep in play. Buttons and Sky galloped across imaginary bridges, rescuing castles, fixing what needed fixing. Pierce sat on a bench at the far edge of the park, close enough to see, far enough to respect. He no longer mistook distance for absence. Willa waved when she noticed him. Junie waved, too small, casual, unburdened. The way children waved when they felt safe. Pierce smiled and waved back, then looked away, letting the moment belong to them. He thought of the question that had started everything. Where do we sleep now? The answer he understood now was never just about roofs. It was about whether the world noticed you when you asked. Redemption, Pierce had learned, wasn't a moment. It wasn't a dramatic apology or a second chance handed out neatly at the end of a story. It was a habit. A choice made every day, especially when no one was watching. Pierce stood ready to leave. Behind him, the girls laughed. Ahead of him, the city waited, not as a project, not as a graph, but as a place where lives unfolded quietly, stubbornly, hopefully. And for the first time in a long while, Pierce Halston didn't feel like a man trying to outrun his past. He felt like someone finally walking in the right direction. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.